Nigeria's agricultural sector holds the key to the country's drive for economic diversification. Yes, the sector has grown consistently at an average of 2.6% over the past 3 years, as at Q1 2020, agriculture accounted for 22% of the country's gross domestic product GDP, compared to oil and gas, which accounted for 9.5%. In addition, the agricultural sector remains the largest employer of labor in the country, providing jobs for the more than 1/3 of the Nigerian labor force. With the economic disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and the attainment of food security in the country could deepen, as the impact is already being felt in the form of rising food prices. However, to ensure that the agricultural sector is not further impacted by the pandemic, the Lagos State government has earmarked a sum of 19.5 billion naira for the sector in 2021 budget. In a bid to boost production and, of course, achieve sustainable food security in the state, the state government also unveiled various agricultural programs, such as the establishment of the Lagos Agripreneurship program to train 400 youths in the various agricultural enterprises, empowerment of youths and women in various agricultural value chain, of course, the completion of the rice mill at Immortal, empowering of 1,172 women and youths in the value chain of rice, poultry, agriculture, aquaculture, I beg your pardon, amongst others. This seems to be very, very interesting. I'm not doing this alone, of course. I said it earlier. Joining me live in the studio on the side, I have to discuss food security and, of course, how it affects Lagos State, the Commissioner for Economic Planning and Budget, Mr. Sam Egube. It's good to have you again on the show, Mr. Egube. Of course, he's not always doing this alone. The Commissioner of Agriculture is here, Ms. Abisola Olusoya. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
It's great to have you join us on the show for the first time.
For the first time.
Okay, well, let me start from this side.
Yes.
And it's ladies first. And happy International Women's Day to you.
Very much.
That's a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's start on this note. From 14 billion to 19 billion. What are you looking at? Why this improvement, 39% increase in what was allocated to the agricultural sector? What is happening?
So every time we talk about COVID, we talk about NSAS, one of the things we say in Lagos is that you can never allow a crisis go without the benefits that come from it. And one of the things that is clear is that Lagos is a strong market center, but it can easily be disrupted if the supply chain is affected. What that means is that we don't need to organize and reorganize ourselves in a way that will ensure food security and protect ourselves somewhat from the risk complexion of a supply chain challenge. And so we will find out that we're looking at production of agricultural produce, and in addition to that, we are looking at processing, given that we are a market center, but we're also looking at storage, because when the supply chain gets interrupted, it's your storage that actually goes out there.
Yes.
To get storage going, we needed a market reform that basically ensures that we coordinate food supplies into Lagos for quality, for quantity, and for storage and preservation. So it is in that light we have made significant investments in the agricultural sector. Now, because we have huge assets already in terms of land assets, you see that the capital improvement, which you are seeing increase, is about 16%. But a lot of the improvement actually is coming on the recurrent side, where you are looking at seedlings, you are looking at people empowerment, you are looking at training, because you must train the people and get them ready for the agric business. So you see a lot of growth of 285% on the recurrent side. Yeah. You see our partnership segment, where we are partnering with the World Bank on the NCARE program on the overhead side, growing quite astronomically. And all of that is just basically to prepare us for this onslaught. But also the African Free Trade Zone is coming, and we must look at all of that together, right, in preparation. If we need to continue to lead this market, then we must be prepared to do that with the way we direct our resources in the budget. That's what you're seeing.
A lot of work to be done by your ministry here. All ministries actually are going to be very busy. We've seen that already.
Yes.
But looking at this, what more? You had some projects already on ground,
yes,
and some projects that are almost completed, and new ones that will spring up. Take us through some of this and what we should expect.
Okay, so like the Honorable Commissioner had rightly said, the approach is three-pronged: internally food production, production, externally partnerships, and then the third is the market transformation agenda. With regards to the projects that should cater to these three cadres of what we are doing around the agricultural value chain transformation, we are looking at the Immortal Rice Mill, which is like a flagship project. Obviously, at the start of Mr. Babajide Olusola Sanwo-Olu's administration, this project was roughly at about 15% completion levels. But as of today, as I speak to you, this project is currently at about 85% completion levels, looking at the civil works and then the equipment installation. This project will cater to over 250,000 jobs across Nigeria, across the entire rice value chain, and we are hoping to see this commissioned by the month of May of 2021 itself. This facility will churn out over 2.4 million bags of 50 kilo processed rice, and when we talk of the value in terms of transactional value, it should be in excess of 400 billion. So you can imagine the amount of value in this chain alone, and Lagos will be the flagship processing center for Nigeria, considering that this mill is the largest of its kind in Africa. We are also looking, there's a project which we would like to elaborate on, which will be the Lagos Aquaculture Center for Excellence. The reason for this, which is tailored particularly towards the fisheries sector, is because fisheries is actually one of those value chains in Lagos where we have competitive and comparative advantage. Lagos is covered by water bodies to about 22-25%. So it only makes sense for us to look at fisheries as an area where we can really add value and draw value from. So what the Lagos Aquaculture Center for Excellence will do for us is to serve more as a processing center. What we have currently with regards to demand for fish in Lagos is over 400,000 metric tons. What we currently produce is about 174,000 metric tons. So you see the deficit is quite much. What this also means is the reason for the fishermen and the aqua farmers not being able to produce to full potential is because they don't have ready off-takers to take the fish off of them and then to be able to sell it at good value and make good margins. So if we have that large processing facility that can offtake massive quantities from them, assure them of certain price point, then it would incentivize them to produce more. And then this processing center can also act as a hub for processing and then onwards towards exporting some of these items out of Lagos. We also have the Lagos Agripreneurship program, which tailors particularly towards the empowerment of youth, the training of youth, skill set building, and what have you. The plan is that over the next 3 to 4 years, we should be able to train well over 15,000 women and youth. And in last year, we trained over 1,000. This year, we are looking to an excess of 2,000. Now, if not for the COVID pandemic, obviously, we should be able to train more. We have 2 facilities, one in Araga, one in Songhai, Badagry. And the idea is to take one as a training facility and then to be able to take this youth and take them to the Songhai, Badagry facility for the implementation of all that they have learned. What we have also done now is to inject an internship program into the mix, such that after the training at the facility, they are able to also go through the rudimentaries of what they have learned with actual farmers who can also teach them the business element of what they have learned before they bring it towards implementation at the facility that we are looking at. And then we are looking at projects particularly with regards to poultry. Poultry production, we are currently at 72,000 metric tons when we talk of poultry birds, but in terms of the demand is over 236,000 metric tons. The poultry sector was badly affected, same as the fish aquaculture sector last year. This year, obviously due to high cost of feed and also due to the ban on importation of maize, which has largely impacted them, and then you see a lot of issues around egg gluts because they couldn't get their items also to market on time last year, and then that has impacted greatly this year. The idea is also around partnerships, and we're talking about partnerships with private sector. We are setting up large processing centers for poultry. We're also setting up large production pens for the poultry, such that we're able to produce in larger numbers. Processing is important because as opposed to having imported frozen birds, you're actually having live birds that are of good quality, standard, and then Lagosians are eating wholesome, healthy food. So for processing, for poultry, and in terms of production as well, we are also upping the numbers. We are looking at the value chain also of vegetables. Vegetables is actually very critical. Lagos requires over 1 million metric tons of tomatoes on an annual basis. More than 50% of this is lost due to post-harvest losses, basis the way it is transferred from other parts of the country to Lagos, and storage issues. So the idea is for us to establish greenhouse estates, use greenhouse technology such that we have fresher produce, we have it at the right pricing, because at least if you're producing it since we are the market, then ease to market, and then the ability for the farmers to be able to make the margins is also there. So the greenhouse estate project is also actually a very key deliverable for this administration, and we'll be taking that off in this year 2021 itself. So when I look at the value chains, we can't play in every area in Lagos as Lagos. So the focus once again will be obviously rice due to processing. It will also be vegetables. Looking at the greenhouse estate, it will be poultry because we also consume a lot of meat. It will also be fisheries. And then one key value chain that is critical also is the red meat value chain. Now you might say we don't produce beef, but don't forget Lagos is the #1 consumer of beef in Nigeria. Lagos consumes over 1.8 million heads of cattle on an annual basis, consumes over 1.44 million heads of sheep and goat on an annual basis. Nigeria produces just 3.8 million heads of cattle. So it goes to show you that Lagos is the #1 cattle consumption state in Nigeria. But what does this mean? I mean, just a few days ago, we had the issue where the cattle dealers had called on a strike, and then you saw the average price of cattle doubled in a space of 2 to 3 days. What this also means for Lagos is we need to establish a feedlot system. We need to have an entire transformation around our red meat value chain. What we are doing under the administration of Mr. Babajide Olusola Sanwo-Olu is to say, you know what, the cattle coming into Lagos, are they even good enough? Are they healthy enough? Animal identification and traceability systems is very critical. What you have currently is animals coming in from other parts of the country and going straight to slaughter. So in order to identify whether those animals are sick or not, you don't have that much time, and you could end up having animals that are diseased. So what this means is the traceability system, identification system is important, which is where we are setting up. From there, we are setting up feedlots. Currently, we'll be setting up over 1,000 feedlots within the next couple of months. The average lot should be a minimum of 5 hectares in terms of space, and should be able to take about 500 heads of cattle. And what this also means is that we are giving the opportunity to investors, to private sector participants, to come into this sector, because in terms of the revenue that can be generated, it is huge. You are talking of over 328 billion in terms of the size of the space. And then you move on to the abattoirs, you move on to the meat market, you move on to your cold chain storage solutions, and then you move on to the consumption of this meat. So there's so much that we are doing in this space.
Very good insight there into what's been happening and what you're doing and what you will be doing.
Yes.
But I'm going to ask you, the job creation aspect seems to be very important for you. How do you see budgetary provision supporting this job creation in the sector, particularly with the challenge we face with the youth?
Well, at the end of the day, everything government does only holds value when the people in that government benefit. So it's really about Lagosian, it's really about the household income. Usually, you ask me why we're increasing this, it's because Mr. Governor has seen it, right? And I mean, you can't bet just listening to the Honorable Commissioner see that there's a great opportunity in that sector. And when she reads out the numbers, those numbers sound to me like jobs.
Yes.
Right? They sound like jobs because it is the activity of people in this platform that is really a job. Right? It means that those markets, those value chains have the capacity to pay for those head counts in jobs. And that is why it's easy to then move the budget in that direction. Now, to make this work, you need capacity. Is the reason why you have people as qualified as the Honorable Commissioner driving the entire sequence and bringing out all the things that are required to make it really work functionally and efficiently, which is in line with the vision of Lagos, right? Really to drive an economic and financial hub out here that is global in nature, right? That is efficient, that is functional, right? And that is productive. So we will continue to build the budget. But she said something very important. It's not just about the budget, it's about partnerships.
Yeah, I will ask you that. How does that argument?
Exactly. So we also look around and try to build partners. So we are building partners both locally and internationally, right? Because in some of these production centers around, I mean, when we talk about tomatoes or we talk about meat, Lagos is not necessarily a high production center, but we must control what happens in the market in terms of quality and in terms of standards, so that we have the things our traders in Lagos get higher value from it. Because if you bring a whole a tonnage of tomatoes into this market and 45% gets spoiled on the road, who do you think pays for it? Lagosians, right? So you must ensure that the packaging system, the transportation system, and the storage system align themselves well, so that if the full tonnage comes into Lagos, it's either that the prices will go down theoretically by half, or the traders in Lagos will move up their revenues by doubling it, right? And that is good for everybody and increases their capacity to really employ more. Now, we also partnering with countries around the world, right? I mean, if you look at the Netherlands, for example, they are a small-sized country, but they are number 2 in terms of food supply to the world. And they align very well with the smallness of the geographical area of Lagos. And so partnering with them also improves the quality and the skill, right, with which we do our production. It also improves the science which we deploy into making that happen in terms of the yields that we can get. And given our market, we then line up processing around it. When we talk about fish, for example, right, you can see the gap, right? And so then you also see that our production is about 20%. We need to grow that production.
Sure.
She talked about the challenge about feeds and about the fingerlings, right, being one of the issues that affects that production, and then the market. Now, what Lace will do, right, which you just described, is to also supply fingerlings and supply feeds, right, and then it will be there also to buy the output. So it's a full cycle provision. We are sure it will do that on the employment side. She talked about the rice mill. She talked about 250,000 jobs that can be created from that. So when we do also our greenhouse estates, it will do the same, right? When we improve fish, it will do the same. So it is that production, that increase in the amount of employment that this can produce, but the employment will not happen if the people are not trained. So she talked about the agripreneurship programs. She talked about all the training programs that must happen ahead. So it's why you see here that the recurring expenditure is going up by 285. So it's not just recurrent to service government internally, but to service the production systems, the input systems, right, that support all of these things she's talking about.
You talked about something very important, and I want to ask the Honorable Commissioner about that. That's the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. A lot of talks about this since January, and it's a big market indeed. If you look at it, and Nigeria should not be left out. How do we intend to position Lagos should take and also do something here? Where are we when it comes to this?
Okay, so if you look at the African Continental Free Trade Area, the agreement, it's centered largely around markets.
Yes.
And we say Lagos is the market for sub-Saharan Africa, even Africa. With a population of well over 22 million people, it only makes sense that as a market we must position ourselves, which is why under this administration we've taken the proactive steps towards implementing or putting together a policy around food transformation systems and then implementing it. We have world-class consultants working with us on that, and it should be rolled out very soon. But the idea around this is we need to transform our market. Our markets need to be better structured. Lagos is largely an informal market, and I don't mean Lagos just the name by itself. Nigeria largely, when you consider the population, when you consider the formal versus the informal, it should roughly be maybe 20-80%. So in a largely informal sector, what you have is less transparency. You won't have clarity around data, around numbers, which means it will largely impact on investment. Be it foreign direct investment, be it local investment, which is why generally what you see in the agricultural space is less investment even by the banks supporting farmers. And you see a lot of federal government interventions through the CBN, which shouldn't be. For any sector to thrive, it must be private sector led, which is why agriculture now needs to position itself in a different light. What this administration is trying to do largely is to say, you know what, this market we really need to organize it, because this is our area of being able also to capture value for our people, and then also being able to transform the state. With over 22 million people, once again, you have different types of markets. But when you look at the food market alone, it is huge. The amount of food consumed in Lagos on an annual basis is almost 5 trillion naira. And when we look at this is a huge number to play with. But how much value are we able to capture for our people? Like the Honorable Commissioner had said, you have a lot of post-harvest losses, which translate into higher price food, exactly, for the food of people. And this also translates into less disposable income available for the people, which means you have more poverty. More poverty obviously leads to more crime and insecurity. So you see why agriculture plays a key role in addressing even security issues in Lagos and Nigeria as a whole. Which is why in transforming these market systems, the idea is for us to be able to mine data. The idea is for us to be able to start driving standardization to the point of origin. And once we're able to drive the standardization, which will now center largely around how the food is transported, in the kind of trucks it is transported in the price point, even because you'll be having ready off-taker agreements with certain areas where you'll be buying these foods from, and then you'll also be able to drive packaging as well. It should definitely lead to a lot of other issues and a lot of other things which would largely impact what is coming to Lagos and the position Lagos also plays. This also means that for these other African countries that may want to bring in food into Lagos, the idea would be, yes, Lagos is open and ready to trade, but we will focus on the areas where we have competitive and comparative advantage for production, whilst whatever will be coming in from these other areas will center it largely around processing, which is why in being able to streamline the market, we'll be able to show investors the opportunities that are available, such that we tailor the investment that they'll be bringing in centered around processing towards those food items that will be coming into Lagos. So essentially, we'll be transforming Lagos into a processing hub. We will still be a production hub, but obviously not in the scale and magnitude we would want to have, considering the fact that we are the smallest state in Nigeria, considering the landmass. So processing would be the key, which is why, for instance, the Mortar Rice Mill is going to be the largest processing rice facility in Nigeria. So you can imagine having maybe the largest tomato processing plant also in Lagos, and you have other value chains where you can do large-scale processing as well. If you consider being the commercial nerve center of Nigeria as well, where you have the likes of the Guinness, the breweries, and what have you, automobile companies, it also means that a lot of these companies make use of agricultural raw materials. So if you have these raw materials also coming in from these other countries or from other states, it only makes sense that you have more investment in processing facilities by the private sector, which would definitely drive employment, which will drive higher incomes for people, higher disposable income, and then you have less security issues, and you have better health systems and what have you. So agriculture plays a key role, and that's what I would like to reiterate. For me, agriculture is the key to having this nation be more secure in terms of governance and what have you, and also even in terms of health. If one leg of this tripod is broken, then you have a collapsed system. So agriculture actually holds the key to this economy.
What I would just say also is that when you look at the African Free Trade Zone, it helps us in terms of food security.
Yes.
So we have more options.
Exactly.
We cannot stop food from coming to Lagos because there are food sources from everywhere.
Yes.
It will create healthy competition as well, because everybody will be looking for the market, and that will improve the value that Lagos has as a market center. So if you are coming from the north, you know also where we can get from the west, we can get from Hawaii, we can get from anywhere, and so you will be competitive in the way you build your systems up. Also, processing that he talked about, if you know the difference in value creation between production and processing, if we become a processing center, it will be tremendous for the economy.
Adding value. Let's take a break. This discussion is really getting very interesting. But let's take a break, and when we return, I still have the honorable commissioners in the house. We'll continue this discussion. It's your business, Nigeria. Don't go away. Thank you very much for staying with us. It's still Business Nigeria. I still have the honorable commissioners in the house with me, and we're still looking at something very important: food. No one jokes with that. Food security is important at this time. Let me start again from the HC economic planning and budget. I'm seeing Lagos move away from the kind of labor-intensive kind of agriculture we used to have into high-scale mechanized farming. How are we looking at this? Is that also provided for in budget 2021?
So it's so I keep saying every time I talk about things like this, as people rule out Lagos and talk about Lagos, I always say it appears Mr. Governor saw tomorrow today, right? And the entire team's agenda holds out so strongly all the time, no matter how the shakings that come to challenge it, right? So technology is one of the pillars. It's education and technology. And when we talk about education, Greek education is not removed from it, and it's about how we use technology to leverage education, but also how we drive technology as a business. In that light, right, we are currently driving 3,000 kilometers of broadband fiber duct infrastructure, which really the objective is to drive high capacity, high speed internet into businesses, into homes. What that means is that our communication infrastructure becomes significantly more efficient. It will be easier for people to ride technology and use it as an enabler, right, in this case, in the agri sector. So whether we are exchanging research output or co-creating things across the world, technology will begin to play a whole space. Also, in the entire market space, you now have a lot of technology solutions as to how to assess the market with your produce, right? How to get data as to where scarcity is and where there are excesses. How to run exchanges. When we talk about the market reform, it's a reform also that will help run efficiency. So if I have a stock of garri in my store that I am in K2, and someone else does not have a scarcity in my 12, the system should be such that it should tell me that I don't need to go to the market to restock. I can just get from the stock of the person in K2, and everything begins to work very efficiently. But also we have an open data system that has geospatial adaptability or alignment. So we are able to look at our spaces, our geospatial spaces. We are able to then deploy intelligence, satellite intelligence, as to the productivity of our small land spaces. Yes. Right, to ensure that we are getting the maximum that we can get per area of land. So it's going to be very research and technology driven to be able to use your small land size Lagos and then lead, right, despite the small land size. I want to talk about the partnership with the Netherlands, for example, is because they've done it with their small land size, being number 2 in the whole world, right? We believe we can do the same, and it's going to be driven by technology and by research.
Talking technology, I was speaking to an agribusiness, an economist and an agribusiness expert, and we're talking about at this moment we have techniques that can make us know how many seedlings we need at a particular. You were trying to explain that. Can you take us through what really technology can do and make this easier for us? Okay,
so what the person was obviously trying to talk to you about is called precision farming. Okay. So meaning maybe for this output that you would want, what exactly would you need in terms of input, in terms of the value to be able to derive that output. So precision farming is actually very critical for agriculture, particularly for Lagos. Like you rightly said, a very small land mass. What it means is that as opposed to looking at land as the solution for Lagos to have those increased food production numbers, what we should actually be looking at should be increased yields. Meaning maybe in an average area in Nigeria where, let's say, for every hectare of farmland for rice, you could get, let's say, 2 kilograms of rice. Lagos should be looking at, say, 8 kilograms of rice, meaning what you would have required 4 times the size of land, you'll still be able to produce it and be able to get 4 times the quantity that you desire. So precision farming is actually very key for Lagos particularly. Now, what I would rather want to focus on, not so much about technology, because when we speak of technology in the agri space, we are still much far behind, and rather mechanization. It is still technology, but looking at mechanization holistically is actually the solution for us in this state. And the reason why I say so is this. We still have land in Lagos that have not been cultivated. But what a lot of our farmers are facing is with regards to land clearing, the high costs and the impact it has on their capital base. When you compare the cost of clearing a hectare of land in Lagos or in the southwest to what you have prevalent in the north, it is 5 times the amount. In the north, to clear a hectare of land is roughly at about 70,000 naira. In the south here, it's roughly about 350,000 naira. So you can imagine the impact. And then when, let's say, the federal government puts forward interventions, the south ends up not having the advantage because of the high cost, obviously, of land clearing, which is why the administration of Mr. Babajide Olusola is taking the proactive step in this year 2021 to make available tractors, for instance, for land clearing. We have identified clusters in the state where food production is critical. So we're talking about Hectare, Badagry and Ikorodu. We've also identified farmer bases, and we've identified the value chains where this is highly required. Rice, for instance, is actually critical, and land clearing will be important. So in the next couple of months, we'll be rolling out tractors, we'll be rolling out the implements and the additional tools that will be required for easier land clearing, for easier planting, and then for easier harvesting. Once these are done, then you can now move to the processing, which is where technology now also comes into play, and then you can use high scale equipment, or you can use modern equipment in processing for better efficiencies and productivity, which is where digital financing, funding and what have you now comes into play. You have all these technology companies, let's say for instance the likes of Farm Crowdy and Thrive Agric, who actually do some sort of crowdfunding, and this actually enables these farmers to access loans without having necessarily to go to the banks. This is actually a good solution also for those in the agri sector, because when you consider the interest rates that the average bank would actually demand of these farmers, they would be unable to pay, because agriculture in particular has its peculiarities around seasonalities and cycles. It's not like an average business where you put in money today, you are short of the margins tomorrow. It's cyclical and seasonal and what have you. So agriculture is that different, which is where this funding and what have you around digital financing is actually very critical for those in the agri space. And then when you're not talking of technologies, again, going back to precision farming, I'll go back to the greenhouse technology once again. It's actually very critical. Greenhouse technology being that you can actually control the climatic conditions under which your plants, under which your crops can grow. And this is actually very important for Lagos State if we want to arrive at the numbers we want to arrive at in the next couple of years. Like I said, our food sufficiency level is currently 18%, 20%. We want to move to 40-50% in the next 2 to 3 years. Controlling the climatic environment is actually very critical, considering the environmental impact and what have you around climate change in Nigeria. So for technology, greenhouse technology is important, precision farming, mechanization is very critical. And then, like you rightly said, access to funding and access to markets. What technology does to be able to show that you can match supply and demand is the most critical part of the chain. You have Lagos farmers currently who are unable to sell their produce because it's usually looked at as being more higher price point, or at a higher price point than what you have coming from the north. And that is because here they will take their time because of the land clearing cost and what other expenses they are. It would obviously drive the costs upwards as opposed to the north. So what we want to do in this space is just to ensure that we deploy the right technologies that will also help our farmers link better to those who need those items, and then everyone is happy because they're able to make the margins and they get wholesome foods as well.
Very beautiful projections. And as we look at it, I see that there seems to be a transition period from when negotiations we start to see all of this. Honorable Commissioner, what do you think? Because it takes a process. So what are we looking at in the short term, medium term, and long term?
I think she will be able to better tell us that. Okay. But in terms of actual initiatives and the timeline for those initiatives, okay. Right? But I believe that agriculture, like I said, is in cycles. There are things that must come up today. Before this administration ends in another 2 or 3 years' time, you would have seen a lot of the rice mill will be ready, right? And you begin to see the impact of the rice mill on employment begin to come out. You will have had the greenhouses expand, because the greenhouses will start in this particular year, and then you will then see the expansion. You will see the effect of the partnerships with other states and with other countries begin to show in the type of quality, in the way we deploy technology, the way we deploy research, right, into the outcomes that we see. And of course, in 2 years' time, the entire broadband, that thing we're talking about, will be live and it will be lit. And so you will see the impact on that in the way the market is censored. We also have seen the market reforms kick in by that time. So I think there are exciting times ahead. They are intricate. It requires careful project management.
Yes.
It requires a lot of intelligence. It requires robustness of the way we handle it. And I think the cabinet is quite strong, and the team can deliver on that.
Indeed. What are we expecting? Short, medium, long?
So like you said, agriculture is cyclical.
Yeah, it is.
But another thing I would like us to take away from here is agriculture needs patience. You need to be patient to be able to reap the benefits of it. And like he said also, it takes a lot of planning, which is what we've been doing in the last couple of months to ensure that the outcome we want at the end of the day is what we will really get. So in the short term, we have a couple of projects obviously that are nearing completion. In the medium term, what we want to focus on is to ensure that right now, as we kick off with the market transformation agenda, by midterm, you should be able to see the full effect of that to a reasonable degree, because this will largely drive production as well, and then it will drive the linkages that we want in terms of funding, in terms of partnerships. In the long term, the idea is we want to drive food sufficiency levels, if possibly, to 100%. It is possible with the use of technology, like we said again, precision farming, greenhouse technology, drone technology for geospatial planning. And when we talk of the likes of the hydroponics, aeroponics, soilless farming, which is very possible, we should be able to see the use of technology in a bigger space. We should be able to see innovation hubs around agriculture. We should be able to see the value for money that we want our farmers to see, such that it incentivizes them once again to come into production. And then particularly, the larger picture is to be able to drive more youth inclusion in agriculture. Right now, you don't see the youth particularly interested in agriculture because, like I said again, it takes a lot of patience. It is cyclical. It could be expensive at the onset, and then you don't have a lot of financial institutions ready to give the backing that is required. So the idea is, in the short term, in the medium term, we should be able to change the narrative around how agriculture is viewed. It is not a way of life anymore. It is a business, and the business aspect of it is a science. For every 1 naira you put into the ground or into your livestock, how much should you be able to derive from it? That is what makes business sense to most people. If I can at least project that this is the profitability that I can derive from this, then you have more people going into this, which is what we would like to focus on in the short and medium term, to be able to show people that this is where the money can be made. And then in the long term, you begin to see the ripple effect of this across board. Like you rightly said again, once people see the value in this, once they see the money, investments coming on a larger scale, you see more processing centers, more production centers, and what this will translate into obviously is higher disposable income for our people, and then you see prosperity rise, and you see better security, safety, governance, and what have you in this space.
That's a good way to leave it there. Commissioner for Agriculture, Lagos State, Mr. Abisola Olusanya, thank you very much. We will keep a tab on you as also the watchdog. We will be watching and we'll make sure that we get what's happening and we are following up with all of these developments.
Yes.
And for Mr. Samuel, we'll be monitoring implementation and we'll continue to also do that. Thank you very much for your time. Commissioner for Economic Planning and Budget, Lagos State. It's always nice having you on the show. I really appreciate this.
My pleasure.
All right.